Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, paving the path to the National Football League. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be back with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen every day on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. He's the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. And Chris, as we rejoin and kick off a week here today, got a few more Red Raiders expecting to get started as far as professional opportunity in the National Football League. As you mentioned last week, now when you talk about some other football leagues available to those who are looking for professional shots, may see some things continue to develop elsewhere outside the NFL. But somewhat as anticipated today, we got a few undrafted free agent guys that we'll get to, and then also want to touch on the next wave, 2024, 2025, 2026. How far you want to go? Maybe we just stick with the next year. Most draftable Red Raiders that are on campus right now, and we'll see line up once again at the Jones. But Chris, excited for some of these guys to get opportunities. I know that obviously you and many other Tech fans kind of develop maybe, this little guy or this guy that you like his story over here. You like this story. So wherever you want to start with somebody that maybe got your attention, whether it's a Wolff or a Muddy or whatever, we've got some guys that I am really anticipating following. I think maybe in some cases in the National Football League for a sustained period of time. There's all kinds of ways to keep a job in the NFL, and maybe we'll see some of these guys do it.
Yeah, obviously we knew about Tyree being picked top 10, and then we kind of waited for days 2 and 3, and I was hopeful that Sir Thompson would have his name called eventually. It did not, and then as you get to the latter part of the draft, there's an argument to be made that in some ways it's better for you to be able to pick your team as opposed to the other way around when you're like get into that kind of 6th, 7th round pick range, and because you can identify fit, you can identify depth chart, you can kind of, city, weather, whatever, you can kind of pick your choice if you have some options. But Sir Thompson's going to end up in New Orleans, and I think going to have a chance. I think you mentioned stories. I don't know if we've ever done a good enough job about like talking about Trey Wolff's story in that what he was 42 of 52 in his college career. And this is somebody that I think has a chance to stick with the Titans or somewhere, just because I think that, if he can just kind of hang around a bit, somebody, has a job for a kicker that he can compete for and I think win eventually. But this is somebody too that his perseverance hopefully will pay off for him, because man, how many situations do we know where a guy is really good at his job and then kind of loses his job, to somebody else, and this person becomes kind of folk hero-ish like Jonathan Garibay was, and has these big game winners and has this 62-yarder, and on and on and on. And Trey Wolff just sits right here and keeps grinding and doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, doesn't feel sorry for himself, doesn't bail out, doesn't transfer. And then it ultimately, comes full circle, and he's this stud kicker again. And I think that, Tennessee or whoever probably looked at that and was like, because kickers, man, it's all mental, and it's so much of it.
Yeah.
It just is. And so I think his story is a unique one, especially in society today when kids quit, kids just bail out. Body language can be bad, or man, I'm just out. And then they end up transferring 3 or 4 times. I mean, no, man, not Trey Wolff, man. I mean,
well, and that's like back. I'll just say I think Trey Wolff may be a folk hero as well. So it's back-to-back folk heroes for us after the season.
I agree.
That he had.
I agree. Yeah, clutch.
Hey,
clutch
you're right, man.
Yeah, clutch
Yes.
kicks. So
Against teams you care about, beating. That is beating teams you care about beating. That is, but yeah, I mean, the context of his biggest moments this season, Chris, it wasn't that he just came back. I mean, it really wouldn't be like the folk connection, if you will, if he just came back, won the job, and did a fine job this season for Texas Tech. And yeah, he really showed his tenacity and relentlessness and perseverance and all these things in doing it. That would be great. We could say so many of those same things about what it means for him intangibly, but yeah, to do what he did in those moments, in those specific games, will generate a connection with the fan base, obviously, that goes just beyond some of those intangibles. And he may be number one on the list. I hate to short anybody else, and of course, it's a different position we're talking about with Trey Wolff for being a special teams guy as far as kicking or punting. But he may be number one on the list as far as guys that have a chance to sustain something here. As far as this class, beyond Tyree Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, and he's there's some longevity there with him, especially if he wants to do this for a living because of the USFL and the XFL. But I mean, he's I just know at Pro Day, man, I think that the Tech contingent kind of walked away from Pro Day going, Trey made himself some money today. You know, like he really did well in front of, I think it was 18 to 20 different NFL teams represented there. So I think that did him well. You know, in Muddy Waters, nothing has changed over the last week. We thought he'd have a chance to be picked, but it's a measurables league. And when you are a tweener and you don't have the measurables for size, you have to make up for that in other things. And unfortunately, you know, Muddy's 40 time being at like, I think the 4.9 range, maybe that hurts him much more than it would ever help him. But I think what Robert Saleh, you know, the head coach for the Jets and organization, and he's a defensive-minded guy. I mean, this is very clearly somebody that knows defense and all those things. I think they just see a very high IQ, productive player that just plays ball, and he plays faster than maybe his 40 time would suggest because of his angles and smarts and all those things. But hopefully he has a chance to stick around. And I did see here's it's like we talk about folk heroes, and here's you a name that I think we hardly knew ye kind of commentary. In that it feels like he's been around here for 3 or 4 years, because he has, and barely has ever played. And it's like a tease. It's a tease every year in the summer and in August, and you hear his name and your coaches talk about his name, and then it just doesn't happen, whether he gets dinged up or it just, you know, it just doesn't ever work. But every year is going to be the year. But I did see Chad Townsend get invited to the rookie mini camp for the Houston Texans. And again, from a measurable standpoint, I think he's like a 4.2, 4.3 guy at times with a straight line, long speed. I mean, he can move. He just can't ever stay healthy. And I think people try to figure out, is he a slot receiver? Is he a running back? Can he return? But he just never did it for any length of time here. But there was a reason Alabama originally recruited him, and that various Texas Tech head coaches and offensive coordinators and everybody kind of would sing the praises of Chad Townsend when they'd get a long look at him, but it just did never stay consistent for very long. But he's going to get a shot with the Texans.
Yeah, that was interesting to see come across. And, you know, before we leave this with Muddy, I just kind of think, aside from obviously what he can do physically, when maybe one of your best gifts is between the ears, like his might possibly be. I mean, he earned a master's degree in his time. He's a smart guy and does things the right way, I think, by all accounts. That takes a little bit more time maybe to make an impact on an NFL roster or whatever it might be, Chris. When you're running the 40 time, nobody's sitting there watching visually maybe how intelligent you are, how quick-witted you are, how fast you process things, whatever it might be. Nobody's watching your commitment Monday through Friday in that 40-yard dash. So there's an opportunity to show some things beyond that as well. And he's got that chance. Hopefully he and these others we have named will make good on that chance. I want to somewhat stay in a similar vein here, but look more so to what's on campus right now, coming up dead ahead. I want to get to those next guys that will be looking to earn some money, so to speak, this season as it relates to an NFL future. Those guys that are still wearing the double T and we'll see on the field at the Jones coming up this fall. We'll get to some of those that could be on a short list as far as NFL prospects next on Locked On Texas Tech. But first, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. NBA postseason on your mind? Now's the perfect time to get in as a new customer with FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app today, and you're going to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet don't bank. You feel me? Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, it's super easy to use. And then you can bet on anything and everything. Money line, point scores, how many fans LeBron gets kicked out in the first quarter, whatever you want, they got it. Plus, FanDuel is even going to let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout. Smoking on that same game parlay pack, my man, only with FanDuel. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets today when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode with Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and before we leave the draft behind for good, at least for this calendar, wanted to take a sneak peek really quickly, Chris, at the next wave of Red Raiders that here in 2023, 2024, we will see hopefully climbing some NFL prospect charts. And who knows what the season will hold. There'll probably be some guys that emerge that maybe we don't even anticipate today. But there are some clearly who have got their eyes on that kind of destination as well and probably have some NFL eyes already on them. And because I'm a lazy man and I'm talking right now, so I feel like I have control of this thing, at least for the moment, I may take the lazy way out and just start the conversation with Tyler Shough. I don't know if it requires a whole lot of thinking, Chris, to think about that guy that might be at the top of the list. Tell me if I'm wrong. Is it Tyler Shough or bust when it comes to #1 most draftable Red Raider, or where do we go?
You know, the thing about Tyler Shough as it relates to the draft is that there's a lot of range there that this could go. If he is healthy and productive, I think people would be surprised at how high he could end up being picked. I don't know if it's first round or first and second round is like the ceiling. I would not rule that out though, and like that's kind of what NFL folks are starting to say at some level. And again, so many things can change between now and a year from now, and players move up boards, down boards, and all those things. But I do think that it's wise to mention that Tyler Shough could be a draftable commodity because of the measurables component, and he just needs to stay healthy and productive. But even then, if we're sitting here a year from now and he wasn't able to play the whole season, somebody may take a chance on him because he's very smart and he's a big kid and he's got a strong arm and all those things. As far as like, you know, the other one is Miles Cole, and I think that in some ways people may hear that and go, "Man, that is a big stretch." Well, literally, because he hasn't done a whole lot in his college career to this point, like production wise. However, speaking of stretch, he can reach across a room and touch both. I mean, so he's got longer arms than Tyree.
To the wall.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The wingspan is there. He's a bit taller than Tyree and a bit heavier than Tyree, not quite as dynamic. But I had somebody that I trust over the weekend tell me if he ends up with 8 to 10 sacks this season, he's a first-round type guy. And again, because of it's the 6'6", 6'7" component, 285 component. I mean, he's a large human. And with long arm, I mean, again, some of the things that the NFL looks for. And so really he just lacks the production parts. He's got to go do it. He's got to go use that frame and that body of his to make some plays and to disrupt and to be in an opponent's backfield regularly on in league games and get to the quarterback and all those things. But if he does that in that 8 to 6, and I think he's only got 1.5 career sacks. So again, you're asking for quite elite. Now, Tech, Joey and James Blanchard and people like that, they seem sold. They seem like, and I saw it in the spring game. He gets around the edge in a hurry. So we'll see. The other,
Chris, I thought I saw it in Houston a little bit. By the way, if you didn't know who he was as a fan,
I agree.
In the Texas Bowl, I guarantee you there are some Tech fans, and I get it. Some Tech fans that think Miles Cole is an inside receiver. So if you had, and I get it. I mean, you're wondering who, but when you see him, you'll understand why from a measurable standpoint, which you can't coach. And he did actually flash a little bit in the season capper against the Rebels last year.
And it's interesting that you say that because Tyree Wilson did that in the bowl game before this past year.
That's right.
And I think there's the direct correlation there into kind of springboarding you into the next step. So
let's go. It should be a good season for Miles Cole.
That's right. Let's
that
hope.
Continues. Hey, what about another length guy? Because in my general kind of surface level research, as far as some prospect lists are concerned, and while we're on the subject of pterodactyl wingspans, Baylor Cupp is a guy that I see a lot out there on some of these lists.
Yeah, I think Baylor again. He had a really good spring. He had that touchdown catch versus Iowa State in Ames. He looks the part, and that's why I think there's part of why so much excitement about Texas Tech football, because you're starting to get guys that other people wanted, or but this isn't. You just had a lot of good luck with another A&M transfer, and hopefully you have the similar amount of luck with Baylor Cupp as well as Tyree Wilson. But these guys just are different, like looking prospects compared to what you usually get. The typical Texas Tech player in years past, it's a tick slow, a tick small, short, or just, there's something that's not quite, right. But when you look at, or there's something that's kept them from, being, recruited by all the blue blood type programs. But when you see the Tyrees, you see the Baylor Cupps, they look like, the guys that are playing for, Texas or LSU or Ohio State or Bama or whatever. And that's what's kind of fun. So along those lines, Baylor Cupp, man, I mean, it's all in front of him. I mean, he's 6'5", 6'6", and he just needs to be productive. And I don't think he's got the game breaking speed. He's not the Travis Kelce, like get separation type tight end or anything like that. But, there was a run on tight ends, at the first round, early second round of the draft this year. And I think it was kind of fascinating just to see I think five guys picked and five tight ends, I think is right, picked in the top 55 or 56 picks, I think. And so, I don't know if we're talking Baylor Cupp for that, but he'd have a chance. The other guys, your two starting corners, Malik Dunlap and Rashad Williams. And then here's your one that's a bit off the radar, but I do absolutely think he's got a chance to be picked next year. It's Tyler Owens. And that's another name that I think people will go, again, man, I'm just not super familiar with him because he was on the team last year, transferred from Texas, briefly played. He played at Oklahoma State, got dinged up, and he just couldn't quite get much continuity. And then when he was healthy again, he kind of passed up Reggie Pearson, and Reggie Pearson was like, deuces, I'm out. I'm hitting the portal. I'm going to Oklahoma. And Tyler Owens played a phenomenal bowl game. But it's like 6'2", 6'3"-ish. It's 210, 215-ish. And I'm just as good playing closer to the line of scrimmage as I am in coverage, which that was always Reggie Pearson's problem. It's just like he would come up and pop you and all those things. He's just not very good in coverage, at all. And I thought Tyler Owens, speaking of bowl games, was just really, really good in that bowl game, just throwing his body all over the place, being very physical. And so he's an impressive athlete, and I think he'll have a chance. The fun thing is, Cowan, is that we've mentioned here, 6 or 7, 8 guys, and that shows you the signs of progress. And Rusty Stats, he's another guy. I think Cole Spencer, those types may have a chance at the back end of a draft next year from an offensive line standpoint. So anyway, but yeah, fun.
Should we be mentioning Steve Linton?
I think Steve Linton is much in the Miles Cole conversation in that I think he has 3.5 career sacks, I think is right. And so if he is as productive as they think, then look out, because he is 6'3", 235 now, I guess is what he's up to. And again, he's just got to, be productive, and he'll have to run a good 40 time. But absolutely, I mean, I part of me hopes that we're not. This conversation is twofold. Part of me hopes that we don't talk about Steve Linton a year from now, because that means you'll keep him for one more year.
Right.
But that also would have meant he didn't have as good of a year maybe as they hoped this year either. So
gotcha. Yeah. Well, hoping for the best for all of the above, and some not named. Like I said, there's going to be some that emerge. You've always got, of course, just bad luck with an injury here or there that can change some things. So be curious to see, and even more so curious, Chris, kind of where Texas Tech is in paving this path to the National Football League as it stands here entering year number 2 under Joey McGuire. I wanted to get your perspective here before we get out of here. Let's just date it post-2000, like starting with the Mike Leach era. You've been as close to the program as anyone, and your best stretches of professional success. And I'm just kind of, I think, for the most part right now, talking about being chosen, regardless of what they did on the other side of, say, the draft or whatever, as far as their careers. But when you've heard Red Raider names called or have seen these lists grow long that have wound up on NFL rosters, I'm wondering maybe what years come to mind for you, what head coach, like what little stretch were you the best? Are we maybe kind of in it right now from the end of Wells to McGuire with some of what you've seen? Because I feel I don't really know how to balance this just as a Tech fan, some feeling that you've been busier in the National Football League with Red Raiders, say, over the last decade or so. You've been busier, had more success in that regard, while you've been less competitive as a program on the college level as compared to, say, some of your more competitive days in the early 2000s under Mike Leach, where obviously the seasons were more interesting. I don't felt like I was hearing as many Red Raider names either called in the draft or sticking on NFL rosters. And I could be wrong, but it has seemed a little bit busier, I guess, or a little more frequent over the last decade to me. How do you view that? Where am I right or wrong? And where do you kind of think, hey, this has been the best little, 3, 4, 5 year stretch for Tech? Or are we still in it right now? I go back to some Tuberville years, when you had some guys hearing their names called early in the last decade. I know it's a little bit of a jumbled question, but how do you feel about Texas Tech as a program and the way they have and the way they will pave the path to the NFL?
Yeah, there was early on in Tuberville's tenure, there was, the Jason Morrow, Brandon Jackson, there was, I think Jakeem Grant, a part of some of those recruiting classes.
DeAndre Washington.
Well, DeAndre Washington. And then you kind of, you stretch it even further there. And that's where you got into Mahomes, because he played with DeAndre and Jakeem. LaRaven Clark was a Tuberville, I think a Tommy Maynard recruit back in the day. So there was a nice nucleus there. What is fascinating about the run that you are kind of in the midst of right now, because I'll go back to, Zach McPherson was an early pick, a few years ago, and every name, and then Tyree Wilson here, and you had the Jordan Brooks pick. Every name that we mentioned, and when there was one name that I failed to mention a second ago, when we were talking about potential picks for next year, and that's Jalen Hutchings. And I think he does have a chance. But things have changed in the sport. So think about it. Think about this. And that's why Jordan Brooks will always be a bit special to me with my memories, because he was homegrown. He's a guy that you recruited, you developed, you stuck with, and then he just kind of blossomed in first-round pick.
Well, and he was being asked to do some heavy lifting the entire time. Yes. I remember Tempe, Arizona as a freshman watching Jordan Brooks and thinking, man, I hope we don't ruin this guy because he looks like he could be awesome.
But everybody else has been a transfer, Calvin. I mean, think about it. Yes. Zach McPherson came from Penn State. Tyree Wilson from A&M. Let me go down the list that I just we just went through a while ago. Shough, Oregon. Miles Cole, Louisiana. Tyler Owens, Texas. Steve Linton came from Syracuse. Malik Dunlap, NC State. Rashad Williams from UCLA. Rusty Stotts came from Western Kentucky. Baylor Cupp from Texas A&M. So only Hutchings amongst that list right there. We talked about Trey Wolff early in the show, kind of a homegrown guy as well. But that's what's changed. And, I think your ability, whether it's Coach Wells's or Coach McGuire's ability, their staff's ability to identify some of these portal candidates that you maybe wouldn't normally get right out of high school. I will say that you are starting to get under Joey and Coach Blanchard and Kitley and DeRuiter and trickles on down. They are starting to get the measurable guys out of high school now. And it's just a matter of, can you keep them and develop them, here without the portal getting in the way and without, somebody throwing a bunch of money like there were rumors about Baron Morton and Jerron Bradley even this past January about them leaving. And they're both kind of technically measurable guys too. But I think you are in a nice run. That's just what's fascinating about that is as we talk about these players, they've all started somewhere else, most of them anyway. And I think that's as much about recruiting as anything these days. It's just about it's talent acquisition. And it doesn't matter if you go get them from an ACC school or some high school in East Texas. It's about what player can help me and how quickly do I need help? What can they do for me and all those things. But I think because you've been so good in the portal, you're about to have a nice run here from a draft standpoint if folks are interested or concerned about that. But I think that you definitely can make some waves there because, again, you've been able to identify players in the portal and then squeeze more out of them than maybe where they were before.
That's really interesting, and that ties back to something that prior to this portal era, in anticipating what it would be like, I had some cautious optimism, or maybe it was just blind hope as a Tech fan, Chris, that you could be a program that would benefit this just in the way that you're describing, in that if your program can't make the same splash in a high school living room that Alabama can just by walking through the door, so be it. But everything that glitters is not gold. And obviously those that have maybe spent a year or two or whatever on the college level might have found out what fit was or wasn't the best as compared to the way they viewed it as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. And if Texas Tech can be a quality, fruitful program, I don't know why them, and I'm sure there are other examples around the country, programs like them, could not be very attractive to some of those who have shown up. You got the experience or whatever that you thought you wanted as a high school aged person. And maybe you figured out, this is not for me, or this roster is X and it's hard to crack. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons why guys are on the move. But why can you not be one of those programs that could be really attractive in those instances to some of those guys who do have those measurables when they get off the bus and do look the part, but are looking for a second home. And that's kind of mind blowing. You running down that list, all the guys that we've named, and how many of them this was their first stop. And I think a guy like Reggie Pearson's another one that, not that Oklahoma needs any benefit in that regard, but he would have been pretty high on this list, I think, if he remained a Red Raider, that we could have used as another example of a guy who came from elsewhere and does have kind of what you're looking for there from a professional standpoint. But that's really interesting, man. And the game has changed. And I guess if I was just going to vote for an era that, you maybe had your best run, not that you can't top it, but it probably was early on. I mean, the last decade, that one you were running through there, from guys like Brandon Jackson to LaRaven Clark and Washington and Grant and some old QB in Kansas City. That was a pretty nice run, stretching from Tuberville into Kingsbury. You kind of had that window with a lot of guys who got to the National Football League, and a lot of them who stuck on a roster. I mean, it was wild. Like Sam McGuavin, obviously didn't play his best football at Texas Tech. It was still out in front of him. And then all of a sudden you see him sticking in Miami for a period of time. And I'm like, what? That's not the guy that would have been on my hot sheet here in Lubbock. But you find a way, you continue to commit to the process, and maybe some good things happen on the other end of it. Can't wait to actually get to football, Chris, which is what does determine who winds up on these lists. Granted, you might think off-season podcast episodes do have a big impact, and they do. Trust me, NFL minds tuning into this right here for us to tell them who to pay attention to. But actual football someday will determine the futures of these guys. Just, about 125 days from now. Chris, enjoyed it as always, man. Appreciate all the insight and perspective, and looking forward to it again tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.
Sounds good, man. Keep hope alive, everybody. Have a good weekend. Well, yeah, we will. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Get back around, subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss it when it hits the scene, or anywhere you get podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed there so we can be with you every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. For Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. We'll see you for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.